Listen, Miss Dubois, I don't need a real wife. I need an actress good enough to make my mother believe and beautiful enough to make my whole family shut up. Can you do that?" Daniel Montgomery's blunt, almost patronizing challenge echoed through the quaint interior of the Wandering Quill, where the smell of old paper and the faint scent of coffee seemed unable to dispel the tension that had just been created. Clara Dubois stood still, her hazel eyes wide, staring at the CEO of Montgomery Maritime, a man whose elegant appearance did not hide the fatigue and a hint of desperation in his blue eyes. Outside the window, the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill were peaceful in the afternoon sun, a stark contrast to the small storm that had just arisen inside the young woman as she realized she was being dragged into a complicated family drama, with a role that could completely change her life or get her into unforeseen trouble. The phone rang loudly in the large office, with a panoramic view of the bustling Boston harbor, interrupting Daniel Dan Montgomery's thoughts. He glanced at the caller ID display, and an involuntary sigh escaped him. "Mom, Dan, 33, CEO of Montgomery Maritime, a shipping and shipbuilding empire built over generations, is a gentleman, intelligent, and admired by many. But there is one force that even this talented CEO has a headache with his mother. Beatrice Montgomery, Daniel, honey." Beatrice's voice came from the other end of the line, sweet, but with an unwavering determination. "I hope you remember our 50th wedding anniversary party at the end of next month at the mansion on Cape Cod. The whole clan will be there. Of course. Mom, I couldn't forget," Dan replied, trying to keep his voice even. "Good," Beatrice continued. "And I hope you won't be coming alone this time. I've spoken to Mrs. Vanderbilt, and Tiffany seems very willing. She's a lovely girl, and her family is a perfect match. I think it's time you got serious about this. Daniel, if you can't find a suitable partner yourself before the party, I'm afraid I'll have to help you with Tiffany." An ultimatum. Nothing more. Dan closed his eyes, trying to contain his frustration. He loved his mother, but her control over his personal life, especially the blatantly arranged blind dates with girls of equal social standing for whom he had no feelings, had become a real burden. Tiffany Vanderbilt, a beautiful but famously shallow and pretentious rich girl, was his mother's latest nightmare. "Mom, I told you I would make my own decisions." Dan tried to negotiate. "You've been saying that for 5 years. Daniel," Beatrice interrupted. "And what's the result? Still alone? Your father and I are getting old. We want to see you settled down, with someone to look after you." The call ended with the usual deadlock. Dan leaned back in his chair, watching the ship slowly leave the port. He needed a solution, a way out, even if only temporarily, of his mother's golden circle and her matchmaking scheme. But where could he find a convincing fake bride in this short month? A few days after the tense phone call with his mother, Dan, in an attempt to find a rare bit of peace, wandered into the old town of Beacon Hill with its cobblestone streets and charming red brick houses. He stumbled upon a small bookstore tucked away on a quiet street, the Wandering Quill. The space inside was cozy, filled with the smell of old paper and the faint aroma of coffee. The shopkeeper, a young woman with naturally wavy dark brown hair, was carefully arranging the books on the shelves. She wore a simple floral dress and a linen apron, looking casual, but exuding an unusual intelligence and charm. It was Clara Dubois. Dan picked up a classic novel and headed to the counter. Clara looked up, smiling. "Excellent choice. Sir?" Her voice was soft and warm. While waiting for Clara to pack her books, Dan noticed a beautiful bouquet of blue hydrangeas in a rustic ceramic vase on the counter. "Your flowers are beautiful," he blurted. Clara smiled more brightly. "Thank you, sir. I'm also a freelance floral designer. These are the flowers I just prepared for a small event tonight." They chatted a little more about books and flowers. Dan was struck by Clara's intelligence, her breadth of knowledge, and her subtle sense of humor. She was not shy or trying to impress. There was a genuineness and naturalness about her that made him feel at ease. As he left the bookstore, a thought suddenly flashed through Dan's mind. This girl, there was something special about her. He didn't know much about her, but his first impression was very good. Could she be the solution to his problem? The thought seemed crazy, but he couldn't get it out of his mind. After a few days of discreet research through a friend in the event industry who happened to know Clara and the financial struggles she was facing as she tried to scale her floral design business, Dan decided to take action. He arranged to meet Clara at a quiet coffee shop not far from her bookstore. Clara was a little surprised to receive the invitation, but also curious. She thought that perhaps the elegant customer from the day before wanted to order flowers for some event. After a few pleasantries, Dan got straight to the point. He explained in general terms that he needed a convincing companion to attend an extremely important family event, one where image was of the utmost importance. And he wanted to hire her to pretend to be his girlfriend, or rather, his fiancée, for the duration of the event, about a week, including the preparation and the introduction to the family. In return, he would pay her a handsome fee, a figure that he knew would be enough to help her overcome her current difficulties and invest in her dreams. Clara was stunned. She looked at Dan as if he had just said something in an alien language. Then she laughed, a little wryly. "Mr. Montgomery, you're kidding. Right. This is quite an elaborate prank. I'm completely serious. Ms. Dubois," Dan said, his voice firm. "I know this sounds crazy, but I'm really in a dilemma, and I think you can help me." When she realized Dan wasn't joking, Clara's smile faded. "Sir, I appreciate your financial offer, but I don't think I can do it. I'm not an actress, and I don't want to get involved in other people's complicated family matters, let alone pretend to be the fiancé of someone I've only met once." She shook her head, refusing. Dan had anticipated this reaction. "I understand your hesitation, Ms. Dubois, but please think carefully. This is not just about money. I see in you intelligence, charm, and the ability to improvise. I believe you will do well, and I promise, everything will be done professionally and discreetly. After the event is over, you can return to your normal life, with a significant amount of capital to pursue your passion." He saw the struggle in Clara's eyes. The financial pressure to open her own flower studio, to escape the many odd jobs, was real. The money Dan offered would not only help her realize her dream, but also give her the stability she craved. I need time to think," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "Of course," Dan replied, trying to hide his hope, but not for too long. Time is running out. After a sleepless night, Clara decided to accept Dan's offer. She told herself that this was just a special job, a short-term role in exchange for a chance to change her life. She met with Dan again and laid out clear conditions, a detailed contract stipulating the role, the hours, the salary, and most importantly, a confidentiality clause and a clear exit after everything was over. She didn't want any strings attached or misunderstandings later. Dan agreed to all the terms. He just needed a convincing fake bride. And Clara, with her intelligence and natural charm, seemed the perfect choice. The crash course in family manners began. Dan provided Clara with a detailed file on the Montgomery family names, hobbies, habits, topics that should and should not be discussed, especially the weaknesses and strengths of his mother. Beatrice, he told her about the family's unspoken rules, how to address each other, and how to behave at parties and formal gatherings. "My mother values tradition and refinement," Dan cautioned. "She'll be watching your every move and word. Even the slightest mistake could arouse her suspicions." Clara felt like she was preparing for the role of a lifetime. She took careful notes, trying to memorize the script. There were times when she felt overwhelmed and wanted to give up, but thinking about the money and the opportunity ahead, she encouraged herself to keep going. Dan also took Clara shopping for some appropriate outfits to introduce to the family. He chose modest, elegantly colored dresses in styles he thought his mother would like. He didn't care too much about whether they actually suited Clara. His main goal was to please Beatrice. Clara, while not entirely fond of Dan's somewhat mature choices, didn't object. She understood that this was part of the role. However, Clara is not someone who easily accepts imposition. With the exquisite aesthetic taste of a floral designer and the dexterity of her hands, she decided to upgrade herself in her own way. She didn't rely entirely on Dan's expensive clothes. She went to her favorite vintage stores, picked out classic yet elegant dresses, and altered them herself to make them fit and look more fashionable. She also designed a few small accessories herself, like a silk flower hairpin or a simple but elegant pearl necklace. When it comes to makeup and hair, Clara doesn't need top experts. She knows how to highlight her natural beauty with soft colors and a simple yet elegant bun. A week before the main event, Dan picked Clara up to rehearse by taking her out to dinner with his sister, Sophie Montgomery, a smart and somewhat rebellious young woman. When he saw Clara emerge from her small apartment, Dan was a little surprised. Clara wore a moss green silk dress that she had tailored herself. Her hair was elegantly tied in a low bun, and light makeup highlighted her bright eyes and warm smile. She looked beautiful, elegant, and had a very unique charm, completely different from the image of a simple bookstore owner or the safe clothes he had chosen for her. "You look different," Dan blurted. Clara smiled. "Hopefully in a good way, Mr. Montgomery." "Call me Dan," he corrected, feeling a little embarrassed. "And yes, that's fine. Sophie will definitely like you." That evening, Clara easily won over Sophie with her intelligence, humor, and sincerity. Sophie, who had always been annoyed with the girls her mother introduced to Dan, seemed to like Clara very much. Dan began to feel that his choice might not be so bad after all. He still couldn't imagine the real shock that Clara would bring to the whole family. But a curiosity and something like attraction began to grow in him. The big day finally arrived. The formal debut dinner was at the Montgomery family's historic mansion in the prestigious Beacon Hill neighborhood. The atmosphere in the mansion was ornate yet classic, somewhat formal and a little tense for Clara. Dan squeezed Clara's hand gently, trying to give her some confidence. "Just relax. Everything will be fine." Mrs. Beatrice Montgomery appeared in the drawing room doorway, the air of a regal hostess. Her platinum hair was pulled back into a perfect bun, and a pearl necklace sparkled against her deep blue silk dress. Her sharp gaze swept Clara from head to toe, missing no detail. "Hello, Daniel," she said, then turned to Clara. "And this must be Clara Dubois, the one you told me about." Her voice was not cold, but there was no warmth either. "It's nice to meet you, sir." Clara smiled, trying to keep her expression as casual as possible. She was wearing an elegant cream-colored cocktail dress that she had found at a thrift store and had cleverly remade, paired with a thin silk scarf. The dinner proceeded in a somewhat awkward atmosphere. Mrs. Beatrice kept asking Clara questions to test her about her fake family, about her floral design business, to which Clara added a few impressive details at Dan's suggestion, about her hobbies and outlook on life. Clara, despite her pounding heart, tried to answer as intelligently, politely, and sincerely as possible, based on Dan's training and her own quick improvisation. Dan's father, Edward Montgomery, was a calm and quiet man who occasionally smiled encouragingly at Clara. Sophie constantly tried to save Clara with humorous stories. Dan felt extremely nervous. He was afraid that his mother would find out something was wrong. But Clara, contrary to his expectations, seemed quite firm. Beatrice still had an unreadable expression on her face, but her initial scrutiny seemed to have subsided. The main event, the Montgomerys' 50th wedding anniversary party, was held over the weekend at the family's Cape Cod estate. The guests included the entire Montgomery clan and the family's closest friends, Boston's elite. This is when Clara really transformed and caused a huge shock. She had secretly prepared a beautiful evening gown. It was not a design from a famous brand, but a vintage emerald green dress that she had found on a rummage hunt, then spent many nights hand-sewing each bead, adjusting the shape to perfectly fit her figure. Her dark brown hair was curled gently, let loose naturally, and was pinned with a leaf-shaped hairpin that she had made herself from small stones. Her makeup was light, but highlighted her bright eyes and radiant smile. as Clara, arm in arm with Dan, entered the magnificent ballroom, where soft music played and warm yellow lights filled the air. An unusual silence fell over the space. All eyes were on them. The Montgomery aunts, uncles, and cousins, who were all too familiar with the stereotypical young ladies that Beatrice often introduced to Dan, were stunned. The woman standing next to Dan was not only radiantly beautiful, but also exuded a grace, confidence, and a special elegance that they had never seen in previous candidates. Her beauty was not ostentatious, not pretentious, but very natural, close but still extremely attractive. Even Mrs. Beatrice Montgomery was surprised. She had seen Clara before, but her appearance tonight was truly impressive. The emerald green dress highlighted Clara's fair skin and brown hair, making her look like a goddess stepping out of an ancient painting. She began to look at Clara with a completely different gaze, no longer with scrutiny, but with curiosity, and perhaps a little like acceptance. And Alexander, Dan Montgomery, he was completely shocked. Again, he knew Clara was beautiful, but he had never expected her to shine so brightly in such a formal and crowded setting. He felt a sudden pride in his chest, and a stronger attraction than ever for his fake wife. He had almost forgotten the original purpose of this act. Tiffany Vanderbilt, the young lady that Beatrice had her eye on for Dan, was also at the party. She stood there, staring at Clara with a look of jealousy and annoyance. She felt completely overshadowed. The air in the banquet hall was filled with whispers. "Who's that Daniel's new girlfriend? She looks amazing, so different from the previous ones." Clara felt it all. She was a little shaken, but then she took a deep breath, smiled confidently, and joined Dan in the flow of people. The shock had been created, and it was bigger than she or Dan could have imagined. But Clara didn't just impress with her looks. Throughout the evening, she won the hearts of most of the Montgomery family with her intelligence, humor, and sincerity. While chatting with Dan's father, Edward, she discovered that they both loved historical novels and English gardens. They had a lively and interesting conversation, which made Edward, who was usually quiet, laugh many times and show great affection for her. Clara responded skillfully and gracefully to her nosy and inquisitive aunts. She did not avoid the personal questions, but did not let herself be spun like a pinwheel. She told humorous stories about her floral design work. Details were seasoned appropriately, making the ladies laugh and change their attitude from inquisitive to interested. In particular, Clara had a long private conversation with Sophie, Dan's younger sister. Sophie, a smart and straightforward girl, was initially a bit skeptical about her brother's relationship, but Clara's sincerity, sense of humor, and interesting views on life completely convinced Sophie. "You're wonderful, Clara," Sophie whispered. "I've never seen Dan so happy and comfortable with a girl. I hope it's true between you two." Even Beatrice, despite her reservations as a mother who always wanted the best in her opinion for her son, began to see the qualities that were valuable in Clara. She realized that Clara was not only beautiful, but also polite, intelligent, and most importantly, she seemed to have a positive influence on Dan. Her son seemed happier, smiled more when he was with Clara. That, to a mother, was more important than any family background or social compatibility. By the end of the party, Clara Dubois, the fake wife, had won over almost the entire Montgomery clan. Through the days of acting together, from the family training sessions to the tense but equally interesting family introductions, an invisible but strong emotional bond began to blossom between Dan and Clara. They were no longer just the CEO and the hired girl. They saw each other's true selves, behind the facades and roles. Dan admired Clara's intelligence, strength, optimism, and warm heart, who always tried her best for her dream despite many difficulties. He realized that she was not only beautiful on the outside, but also had a very rich and precious soul. Clara, on the other hand, sensed the loneliness, the pressure, and even the gentle, caring aspects hidden behind the elegant, somewhat distant appearance of the CEO of Montgomery Maritime. She saw him not as a rich man who only knew about work, but as a dutiful son, a good brother, and a man who was longing to find true happiness, not arranged relationships. In a rare private moment amid the noisy celebration, as they stood together on the balcony overlooking the moonlit Cape Cod coastline, Dan turned to Clara and said, his voice sincere, "Thank you, Clara, for everything. You've done more than I ever expected, and I'm so glad I met you." "Me too, Dan," Clara replied, smiling. "This has been a rather special experience." Without further words, they looked at each other, and a deep understanding and vibration connected them. Love, unexpectedly and naturally, began to blossom from a seemingly impossible covenant. After the anniversary party ended and the contract between Dan and Clara came to an end, Dan was faced with a difficult decision. He truly loved Clara. He didn't want to lose her. But should he continue to lie to his family, especially his mother, finally, with the encouragement of Clara, who also loved him and wanted a genuine relationship? Dan decided to tell his mother the truth. The conversation took place in the living room of the Montgomery mansion, with only Dan, Clara, and Mrs. Beatrice. At first, when she heard Dan confess the whole thing, from hiring Clara to pretend to be him to their true feelings, Mrs. Beatrice was shocked and extremely angry. She felt deceived by her son. "How could you do this?" "Daniel," she cried, her voice filled with despair. "Deceiving the whole family, deceiving me and you, Miss Dubois. How could you agree to take part in such a farce?" But Dan and Clara patiently explained. Dan talked about the pressure he was under, about his desperation at not wanting to accept an arranged marriage. Clara talked about her difficult situation, but more importantly, she talked about her sincere feelings for Dan, about the good she saw in him. Beatrice was silent for a long moment. She looked at her son, saw the determination and love in his eyes. She looked at Clara, the girl who had amazed the whole family with her beauty and intelligence, who had brought laughter and joy to Dan. She remembered the moments when Clara had won the heart of her husband, her daughter, and herself, even if only unconsciously. Finally, she sighed. I don't know what to say. I was wrong to try to dictate your life, Daniel. And maybe I was also wrong to judge others based on their appearance or their family background." She looked at Clara, her eyes softening considerably. "Ms. Dubois, perhaps you are not the person I envisioned for Daniel, but if my son loves you and you truly make him happy, then that is the most important thing." Mr., Edward, and Sophie, upon learning of the affair, were fully supportive of Dan and Clara. They soon developed feelings for Clara and believed that she was the woman more suitable for Dan than anyone else. Tiffany Vanderbilt, of course, is no longer a concern. Clara, with the money she earned from her contract and a small bank loan which Dan secretly helped her arrange, opened her own floral design studio, Fleurs Sauvages, Wildflowers, quickly becoming famous in Boston for her unique style and flair. 1 year later, the sound of laughter echoed through the gardens of the Montgomery mansion on Cape Cod. The Montgomery family was having a cozy barbecue. Dan and Clara greeted everyone, hand in hand. They were officially engaged, with a wedding planned for the fall. Madame Beatrice now loved Clara as her own daughter. She often visited Clara's Fleurs Sauvages studio, not to check on her, but to order flowers, or simply to chat and admire her future daughter-in-law's flower-arranging skills. She even became one of Clara's most loyal customers, introducing her to all her high-class friends. Sophie and Clara became close friends, often going shopping, watching movies, and sharing secrets together. Mr. Edward always gave Clara a gentle smile and sincere compliments. Dan looked at Clara happily, chatting with her mother and sister, a happy smile on his lips. He had never felt so peaceful and content. He had found the true love of his life from an unwilling contract, a fake wife who shocked his entire family with her beauty, but more importantly, had conquered everyone with her own person and soul. Clara turned around and met Dan's loving gaze. She smiled, a bright and confident smile. She had love, a career, and a second family that loved and supported her. Sometimes, the most unexpected things bring the greatest happiness. And she knew that their journey, although it started as a play, was now a beautiful and true love story. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you love this story, don't forget to click like to support the channel, share this story with family and friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories.